So under Files on Canvas, please download goblinvalley.jpg and saltflats.mp4. So download Salt Flats, and we're going to import that as footage into After Effects here. So notice we've already created a project. That's actually the file format that After Effects saves. So we didn't actually name it or anything. We will in just a minute. But to import footage here, we go to our project panel. It's over here on the left. And one way to import footage, we could just drag it in there if we've got Finder open. I'm just going to double click in the empty space right here. So double click right here. So locate saltflats.mp4. And notice we can't actually change it for this. We will be able to later when we create a Photoshop file, a PSD, and import that. We're importing it as footage. And that means just treat it as a static image or a video. It doesn't have layers or any other information. Now this doesn't because it's an MP4 video file. So hit open there. And so I want to try one thing first with you guys. Let's double click on where it says saltflats.mp4 here. So if we double click on it, it opens up over here. This is called the composition window, this main window here. But it opens up in a way we're not usually going to use. This is just so we can see the video itself. And if we click and drag on the timeline right here to go through the video. You hit the spacebar, it'll play it, and it should be able to play it because it's just a video file in real time. And we'll see what I mean, why I wouldn't possibly play something real time later. Okay, so at the top of your composition, composition window, you'll see some tabs. You've got composition, none, layer, none, and footage, saltflats.mp4. Let's close that footage there. So click up there and close that. And let's go back. It says composition 1, layer none, because we don't have either of these there. So we're going to create a composition. We're going to let After Effects do that for us. And then again, we'll create one from scratch. We're going to click on where it says Salt Flats over here in our project panel. We're going to drag it down. This is actually our timeline down here. Drag it down here somewhere. Doesn't really matter where. And just let it go. And so this is our timeline. So if you used other programs with timelines like, I don't know, iMovie or something like that, we've got seconds down here, obviously. You can see it goes from 0 seconds, and this might look differently if After Effects is taking up more of your screen width-wise. You might be able to see more of the seconds here, but I can only see 0 seconds, 2 seconds, 4 seconds, up to 26 seconds and a little bit extra there. And we can click on the timeline indicator, that's what this blue thing's called, or time indicator, and drag it through timeline up to the end. You can also hit the space bar here. And After Effects, you've got 32 gigabytes of RAM on these computers. You're going to get a different result on your own laptop if it has, say, only 8 gigs of RAM or maybe even 16, although 16 should be pretty good. For just video footage, the computer doesn't have to do much to try to play this. Computers are built to play video footage, and there's plenty of RAM here. So again, it can play it at real time. So you can see what I'm talking about up here in the upper right. But if you do have info there and you hit the space bar, it'll say playing from RAM. It'll give you your frames per second. If it's not able to play real time, you'll notice because it'll be choppy or slow or whatever. But it'll also be in red up there in the upper right. It'll say the frames per second in red, and it won't have the word. It'll say not real time. Okay, so the composition window is where we actually see our footage. We'll see how that matters in just a few minutes. We've got the tools panel on the top here. So rather than being on the left like it is by default in Illustrator or Photoshop, it's up here at the top. You can use the space bar to temporarily go to the hand tool and pan around your image. So I'm not actually moving anything. I'm just moving around my footage, I should say, not my image. Okay, and again, so down here is the timeline. Our timeline's also where we have layers. So let's, just to create another random layer, let's take saltflats.mp4 here, and in our project panel, let's drag it down to our layers panel again, to the timeline here. So we'll drag it down there, and we'll place it. You can place it above. You can see this little blue line here, above or below the current footage. It's obviously the same thing, so it doesn't really matter. Place it above, place it below, doesn't matter. But you can see we've got 2 layers here. In this case, they are identical, of course. And so whichever one you have on top, go ahead and select the one on top. And just to show that we've got 2 different layers here, click right here, where I'm trying to highlight here, and just drag this over to the right a little bit. And these footage layers cover each other up. So they both of these footage layers take up the full composition. So if I drag my time indicator right now, right when I get to that top one there, it's gonna start over because it's now showing the topmost salt flats at MP4 again, and it's covering up the one below. So if I could hear the audio, I'd actually hear audios from both of these at the same time, which would be kind of annoying, although there's not much audio on here. And one other thing I want to point out is the effects and presets panel, which is over here. So go ahead and select effects and presets. And this, of course, is where we find any effect we can add here. They're also found under effect in the Mac menu in the upper left. But here we can search for them or twirl these arrows down to locate them. There's also animation presets, most of which, or many of the most interesting ones, are for text and intros and outros. But let's just look at one effect to see what it does here. So let's type in grain right there. And you'll notice as you start typing, it just filters the list. So G, there's a bunch of things with letter G in them, obviously, AI, finally we get to grain. And we could add grain, match grain, or remove grain. And we're just going to add grain just to see an effect here and see what it does. So before we click on that, make sure you're on your top layer here. I'm actually going to click and drag this back to the left. And you can drag it further to the left than past the 0 point. But if you hold down Shift while you're dragging this, it'll snap to your current time indicator, and it'll also snap back at time 0. So Shift is really your friend when dragging footage around through the timeline, because it'll snap at important points. So I'm going to snap that back at 0 there. And there's no good reason, again, to have two footages that are the exact same, at least for today. Okay, so make sure your top one's selected, and then double click on Add Grain, or you can click and drag it over here, or drag it on top of the first layer there. All those will do the same thing. I'm going to double click on Add Grain, and we should get this happening here. So we'll see a little square here, and this is After Effects' preview window. Adding grain, it can actually slow down After Effects quite a bit. So After Effects, by default, just shows a preview of what the effect would look like. It's only going to show the effect inside this square. Even though if we actually rendered this video, like made a video file that we could put on YouTube or wherever else, it would actually show up throughout the entire composition here. But for right now, it's only set to show, like we can see over here, the effect controls. It's only showing a preview window here. So I should point out our project panel's still here. It's just over to the left of effect controls. And so if you can't see it, you can always click on these two little arrows right here and just go back to project or back to effect controls, but it might be hidden right there. So effect controls, let's look at that briefly. So again, here's that viewing mode. It's on preview. You could put it on final output. See some of the grain there, but let me leave it on preview for a minute here. So let's just give ourselves something to see here. So let's just increase the intensity. All values in After Effects use what's called scrubbies, like some things in Photoshop. We can click and type in something here instead of 1, or you can just click and drag on it, like the mouse cursor indicates here. So I'm going to click and drag this far to the right. We can see a lot of grain there, like 20-something. Let's also decrease the size, and it's a little bit too much color information for me there. So I'm going to twirl down color here and check monochromatic. So get some monochromatic noise. And this should still be, I'm guessing After Effects will be fine here, just using a preview window. Even with this amount of noise, this is moving noise. So After Effects is taking into account the actual file here. It's not just static noise. Go ahead, after you check monochromatic if you'd like to, hit the space bar to get After Effects to play this, and you'll see it'll move. The noise isn't just staying put. It's generating noise again and again and again. And hit the space bar at some point, again, to stop that. Notice that we get this green line appear in the timeline here, and that is After Effects' RAM preview at work. We've got a lot of RAM in these computers, as I mentioned, 32 gigabytes, so it can easily preview the entire 26 or whatever seconds here. If you're working with a longer file where more things are going on in it, or a computer with less RAM, After Effects might only be able to preview a few seconds at a time, and then it'll have to start over again. So you might see a few seconds of green, and then you'll start seeing the beginning of the green disappear as After Effects tries to put more in RAM and have to take out the stuff from the beginning. We don't have that problem here, of course, because a lot of RAM and we're not doing too much in this file. But let's see, and it also should be able to play it in real time if you hit the space bar. It should say up in the info panel, real time there, playing from RAM real time. Let's go ahead and change the viewing mode to final output up here for the effect controls. And when we do that, we can, of course, see the noise everywhere. And now, hit the space bar, and it doesn't look like it's playing yet. So it's not playing in real time. I'm getting 5 frames per second here. And so this is intentional, of course. I'm just trying to use this effect to show After Effects actually has to do a lot of work behind the scenes to get some of these effects to work. So it can take quite a long time. So I'm going to hit the space bar. So notice this part's in green. After Effects has already done the work to place it in RAM. It's working memory. So it doesn't have to figure this stuff out. It's there. So if I go back and move my time indicator, I can drag it, or I can just click where the time indicator should be, and it'll move there. So if I move it back to one of these spots with the green line here, and now I hit the space bar, it's already in RAM, so it can play this part in real time. And it'll always be that case unless you have working with a really slow computer. And it's still trying to add more to the RAM, but once it gets to the end of the green line there, it has to go back and figure out what that frame's supposed to look like and add it to RAM at the same time. So the green line again represents stuff that After Effects has already figured out, placed in RAM or working memory. So if you want to be able to see your video working on in real time, you hit the space bar, let After Effects figure it out, a few seconds at a time usually, and then go back and play it again in real time. Okay, so we can see our effect controls up here, but we also need to be able to see them down here in our timeline, and I'll get to this next time we talk about After Effects in a few weeks. But let's go ahead and click on the triangle right here. We're going to twirl it down. Triangle right there. And we can see transform, we can see audio. Audio gives us audio information, of course, and we can also increase, decrease the audio in terms of decibels or percentage if we set it that way. We can transform our file. We can change the scale or position or rotation. We'll get to that in a few minutes here. But I just want to twirl down effects. So we've obviously only added one effect. It's called Add Grain. And if you twirl down that, you can see the same settings down here that you can see up here in the Effect Controls panel. And it might seem kind of redundant, but there's a good reason to have them down here. And the reason is so we can actually animate them. So we can change how much grain there is over time if we wanted to. So like there's no grain and all of a sudden the grain appears because it's a scary part of this totally non-scary video. I don't know. One more thing I want to show here with this video. Let's go back to our project panel up here in the upper left. Back to our project panel. And notice we still have our saltflats.mp4 there, but After Effects created another file called saltflats here with this icon here, and it's called a composition. And this is the main After Effects file. Before we get to that, let's hit Command S for save here. And I guess it looks like desktop here. It'll look like this, of course, save as untitled project. Great name. And I'm going to click right here so I can get more information about where I'm saving this to. Go to my desktop, and I'm going to go to my ART335 folder, which I created. And you don't have to save this, because we'll be saving plenty of things. But just notice the file format. We've only got a limited option here. We're never going to work with a template. So we're always going to save it as an After Effects project. This is not a movie file. You cannot just save an After Effects file and then upload it online. It would not work at all. Because no services know what to do with this After Effects project file. A project file is just After Effects saving links to actual MP4s or JPEGs or whatever, or Illustrator files or whatever. It's not rendered video. After Effects would have to render this frame by frame into an MOV file or an MP4 file or an AVI file or any other file format that you can then upload to YouTube or wherever you're putting your file. But this is what we want to save while we are working with it. So I'm going to hit save here. You can if you want to. Doesn't really matter. I saved it as untitled project. Let's take a look at the composition settings here. So go ahead and right-click on where it says Salt Flats, composition there. And we're going to choose composition settings. You can also get to this, as long as you have it highlighted there, under composition in the Mac menu, composition settings. Same thing, and it takes you to this right here. So the preset says custom. We could put it on some of these things we probably never heard of. Older formats for video, NTSC. But some things we are more familiar with, HDTV 720, 29.97. That means 720 pixels, or 720p. for a TV, and 29.97 frames per second, which is really common. I'm guessing most of our phones would take video with 29.97 frames per second, although you might be able to change that. Another common one is HDTV 1080 or 1080p TV. There's also 4K options down here. We in this class are just going to use either the 720 29.97 or the HDTV 1080 29.97, although maybe you want to use 25 frames per second, depending on what your phone says it outputs to or whatever you're taking video with. So I might choose this if I were going to be creating a new file here. Right now I'm not going to, because it pulled in information from the Salt Flats file. So I didn't have to say, make this HDTV 720p, or I didn't have to do any of that, because my original file was already 1280 by 720, and it's just using that information there. I could, however, change that. So if I want to change the height here, oops, let me make it larger this way. There we go. I can see if I increase the height, now I got these black bars in the top and bottom of my video here, because now my composition is actually taller or has more height than the video. And if I render this file, I would see it with black bars there. There's not really any good reason to do that, though. I'm just going to put it back on 720. And I don't know if lock aspect ratio is on there by default, but obviously if this is checked, and you change one of these, it's going to change both of them and preserve the aspect ratio. Put that back on 720. Unlock that. And we've also got pixel aspect ratio. It should just be on square pixels all the time. No need to change it for anything we ever do in here. And frame rate. And this is a weird frame rate. You probably will never see 29.161. Again, I don't know what device I was taking this video with. I have to go back and check. It's probably going to be, if you click on the drop down there, these are far more common. 29.97 is a weird number to ever even think about, but this is a super common frames per second. Almost 30. There's historical and other reasons behind that, but it's very common. Also 25 is very common, and I might choose to work with 15 frames per second if I'm doing something resource intensive and I just want to be able to work without having After Effects be super slow. But 29.97, 25, probably all we're going to work with, maybe 15. But again, not the frame rate for this actual file here. We've also got resolution. Full resolution is what we want to have it on most of the time. If things are moving slowly, we can have After Effects show us a smaller resolution. This will not affect the file when we render it to an actual video, but I could put it on quarter there. You can see what happens. The only reason you'd want to do that, looks crappy, obviously, but it would go slower. Let me just hit, it would go faster, excuse me. Let me hit OK really quickly. If I hit the space bar now, After Effects can, oh, it's actually running this in real time. It can actually render it in real time because there's less information, less stuff for it to deal with. And we'll see later, it can be very annoying just hitting the space bar and seeing After Effects go frame, 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 with like almost 30 frames in just 1 second. So we might want to change that. Let me go back into my composition settings there. I'll put it back on full for now. We've also got start time code, bunch of zeros, obviously. This first 0 is hours. Second one is minutes, then seconds, and then frames. And I've never had a good reason to not start at 0, but I guess there could be one. And then there's the duration. And After Effects, of course, pulled this information in from the video. This video happens to be no hours, no full minutes, 26 seconds, and 25 frames. I'm just going to hit OK or cancel there. And one more thing I want to show you. So as I mentioned, this is just a project file. After Effects' project file does not actually contain saltflats.mp4. It's just linking to it. So if this file is not present, let me show you what happens. And the reason why I'm showing you this is because you might work on After Effects on your own laptop, and you save the project file and you only bring the project file with you here, or vice versa, and you don't bring the original MP4s or JPEGs, everything listed in your project panel here, After Effects is going to have a problem. Let me just show you. I'm just going to temporarily delete my SaltFlats MP4 in Finder here. I'm just moving it to trash. So if I do that, if you open up this file and you didn't remember to copy and paste saltflats.mp4 or whatever you're working with, you'd get this message, file cannot be found. And you'd see this. You'd still see the grain, because it could still add a grain, but you'd see this very old-fashioned, on purpose graphic here, and this means, can't find that file, sorry. Here's what you get instead. And so you'd want to, most likely you're just going to have to go back to your laptop, copy that file over, put it on these computers too, or vice versa. But I just want you to be aware, because this will happen to all of us at one point in time. We'll forget or misplace a file or something like that. So we'd want to put it back in the right spot here. So let me just go back to, I'm just going back to my trash here and putting that back. If I put it back in the right spot here, After Effects still, it might find it in just a second here if I give it enough time. It's not finding the file. I need to actually tell it, okay, now the file exists, I fixed your problem, bring me the file back. So to do that, I actually have to right-click where it says Salt Flats MP4 here in my project panel. And I could go to, if I know I put it in the exact same spot it was always in, I could just hit Reload Footage. Oh, there it goes. But let's say After Effects still couldn't find the file. Instead, I want to right-click and go to Replace Footage, and then I could point it to the file. Like maybe I put it back in a different spot, and I could point it to where the file is now. Okay, so if that happens, you just have to show After Effects where the file is, and hopefully it's still there. I want to show you creating a composition from scratch here, what it would look like, because we'll need to do this for, it's called Exercise 4B, which is actually due in 2 weeks. Next Monday is Labor Day, so we won't be meeting together next week. So this one will actually be due in 2 weeks. I'll talk about that in just a second. But this is the beginning of how to do that. So in After Effects, you want to go to New Composition here, or you can go to Composition, New Composition. Same thing, but I'm going to click right here on New Composition. We get composition settings, so maybe I'll call this Exercise 4B or something like that. This part, you'd have to look at the settings, know a little bit about your phone. It's probably going to be taking video in 1080p, but you would just have to, or camera, whatever you're taking video with, which I'll get to in just a minute. So let's say my phone takes footage in 1080p. That would be this right here, and you probably won't know the frames per second, but we can fix that later. We can always come back and change this. And After Effects will actually tell us once we import the footage from our device, whether it's 1080, the frames per second. So I'm just going to select this, assuming that's what it is. And you can see that that turns out to be 1920 pixels in width by 1080 in height, 29.97 frame rate. And then we want to put the duration here. And the duration that you'll need for the exercise is, I believe it is 3 minutes. We can change that if needed. And this is how we put in 3 minutes. So this first one's hours. 3 minutes is right here. So 0, 3. Make that say 0, 3. And if we wanted it to be exactly 3 minutes, 0, 3, 0, 0 for the seconds, and 0, 0 for the frames. And those are separated, as you can see, by semicolons. So we'll hit, and you can also change the background color if you wanted to. We'll hit OK. And we get a composition with nothing in it. So this is creating one by scratch. And then we could go, so let me just show you what happens. I'm going to import the Salt Flats just to show you. I'll double click on the empty space here. Import Salt Flats. And I'll drag it down to my timeline here. And Salt Flats is only 1280 pixels by 720. So it's smaller. It's 720p, so it's smaller than the 1920 by 1080 of my composition. Okay, so, and then of course I'd want to actually save this. Creating a composition doesn't actually save your file. I'd want to hit Command S to save this and call it Exercise 4B or something, my project file.